If you used to break down the demographic of the people who've been really, really affected by the pandemic in terms of employment, losing the jobs, it's the younger people. It's that younger age bracket who are first-time buyers, and first-time buyers makes up a huge, huge percentage of what Nationwide does and what we're all about.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Mortgage Heroes podcast, proudly sponsored by Hamlet Homes Warrington, your Warrington property experts. Now today we've got a fantastic episode lined up for you. We've got Britain's biggest building society, believe it or not, and they're here to share some tips for first-time buyers and how to get on the property ladder. So Darren of Nationwide, how are you, mate?
Yeah, very good, thank you. It's nice to meet you again. It's been a while.
It has.
I was just saying it's the first time I've been out for about 18 months, so you're the first person I've met.
Yes, get in there. And what a day to come back.
Yeah.
Hitting the road again. Fantastic. So, Darren, I know a lot about you from being a mortgage broker and the offering that Nationwide have. But yeah, for the guests who, or listeners, should I say, who don't know who you are, talk us through that journey. So what got you into financial services and how long have you been doing it for?
So I'm a business development manager with Nationwide now, but I've been in the industry for about 30 years. So I know you were saying before I don't look it, but that's sort of back in 1992. I started roughly around
the year I was born.
But get away! No way!
It actually was.
Oh my god!
Just to make you feel a bit older.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sam. So yeah, about 30 years ago. But majority of my time spent as a mortgage broker. So I was a broker for about 18 years.
Wow.
And I've been with Nationwide for roughly 10.
Yeah.
So yeah, quite a journey up to now.
And how do you find being a BDM with Nationwide?
Nationwide is genuinely a fantastic firm to work for. When I went over to Nationwide, one of the things that I really, really liked, so I went over on an open day and it was just everybody I met would say, "Hi, my name's whoever. I've been with Nationwide for 30 years or whatever." And
yeah.
Just felt that was just a really nice thing at the time. So it's just a nice, friendly place to work for. So yeah,
awesome.
Good.
Brilliant. So just moving on to Nationwide, I know I was doing a bit of research. They're Britain's biggest building society, I believe, which is quite a powerful statement to say. But Nationwide, talk me through who they are and where it all began for them.
Yeah. So Nationwide started roughly about 200 years ago. So right at the beginning of the cooperative movement, which was going on all over the country at the time. But to follow sort of Nationwide's timeline back, it was a group of friends who all just sat down together and they decided that they would club together until they had enough money to buy each other's houses. And the difference with what happened that then became Nationwide is when they'd done that, they carried on. And they carried on to what we now know as Nationwide Building Society, which has become the biggest building society in the United Kingdom.
So just a group of mates?
It genuinely was. It was a group of mates who just decided that they'd had enough and they wanted to buy their own houses. And that's become what we now know as Nationwide Building Society. And we try to sort of to carry that. Carry that on now.
Perfect. So Nationwide is a building society. I know obviously we've got banks as well. What is the difference for someone who doesn't know between a building society and a bank?
Yeah, so the very basic difference is a bank is owned by shareholders, whereas a building society is owned by its members. So if you was to take a mortgage out with Nationwide, for example, you'd become a member of the building society. So you'd have voting rights and things like that.
Interesting. So it sounds completely different to how a bank would be.
Yeah, it is very different, and we probably funded differently as well. So in terms of the way that a building society works, we bring money in through savings. So we offer savings rates. People come to us to take those savings rates, and then we use that money to then lend out. And any profits that we make on that then goes back into the system, back to the members, and the cycle.
So it sounds very much like the ethos that group of mates 200 years ago set up and you still adopt it now, which is great to see.
Exactly. And that's about mutuality.
Perfect. So we deal, as you know, with a lot of first-time buyers across Warrington and the whole UK, really. So talk me through Nationwide and first-time buyers, because there's a lot of support at the moment and ways that you do support them getting onto the property ladder. Just talk us through some of those.
Sure. So first-time buyers is a huge part of what Nationwide does and what we believe in, which goes back to what we were talking about before. The things that we do to try and help first-time buyers, so free valuations, free product fees, £500 cash back, just specifically for first-time buyers. But something that we're doing at the moment, we're calling it Helping Hand. So we recognise that with property prices increasing, it's really difficult to get on that property ladder. So we will do an affordability enhancement. So potentially we'll lend that a little bit more for a first-time buyer just to help them out to get the mortgage that they're looking for, which you as a mortgage broker will know as Helping Hand.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like a little bit more of a sense check and a plausibility rather than a computer says, no, look, we're trying to help here as much as possible. And especially after the bloody 18 months, 2 years have been through with the pandemic that's ripped across the world, it's nice to see that lenders like Nationwide, who are probably one of the oldest, a bit grey, a bit bored like you, are still looking at ways to innovate and help those younger generations.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to, don't you, to keep developing, keep moving forward, is you have to be able to appreciate there's people coming up behind you and what can you do to help them and how the world is changing around you. And that's just one of those things, isn't it? So thinking that extra little bit outside the box maybe, but doing that little bit more. Yeah. And those first time buyers will become next time buyers, and you know, so it's all about keeping it in the family, bringing people in, and looking after them.
And I suppose by Nationwide helping those first-time buyers and you know setting new initiatives and new affordability checks and giving extra support, they're going to want to stay part of that family for a longer period of time.
A member of the society, and that, as we say, is the difference between a bank and a building society. So,
Perfect. Now, we make a lot of recommendations to Nationwide, not only through price-driven products that you offer, but also different terms of affordability and little bits of criteria that we can pick up on that makes actually this fits for a first-time buyer. So let's take this scenario that we've made a recommendation to go with Nationwide. Yeah. We go into that system, we put all the details and hit submit. What's Nationwide's process when they get that? So talk me through kind of receiving that instruction that somebody's applying for a mortgage. How do you get that through to offer?
Sure. So it's an online system. So however the customer chooses to interact with Nationwide, the application will come through online. The first thing that will happen is you get a little shopping list. Now, the way that Nationwide sets themselves up is just to try and be as smooth and slick and as quick as possible. So when I say a shopping list, that's a list of documents that we'll ask to support the application that's come in. It'll be quite limited, likely to just ask for pay slips, maybe some bank statements, something like that. So you upload those documents. Whilst that is happening, we've already instructed your valuation. So we recognise that that's the part of the process that's probably likely to take the longest because it has to be booked in at somebody else's convenience, and a report has to be generated that will come back. So that's all happening in the background whilst we're checking those documents that you've sent in, as long as they support what you've put on the application. So just for example, the income matches what it says on the pay slips. They'll all be ticked off and ready to go as soon as the valuation report comes back in. Assume everything's fine, and then the case will go to mortgage offer. So that is the bulk of what the mortgage lender does for you. So what Nationwide will do, and then it would all move over to the conveyancer to sort their legal side out.
Yeah, and that's when the real fun and game starts.
Yeah, that's over to somebody else.
We've done our part. So when going back to what you mentioned there about the lender appoints a survey, what is kind of the survey from the lender and what are you looking for when you go in to do a survey on a house?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And it's perhaps one that gets brushed over a little bit too much from the customer's point of view. So it's definitely something that a discussion that they need to have with their advisor. So there are different types of surveys. What's really important to recognise is from a lender's perspective, certainly Nationwide's perspective, all we are interested in is a survey for lending purposes. So some people refer to that as a level 1 survey. it's free. You don't have to pay for it. But as a customer, the customer won't get a copy of that report. It is just for the lender. So a valuer will go out to value the property, and he'll come back and tell us whether he feels that there are any issues with that property. The vast majority of the time there are not. Everything is fine. And we'll just tick that off and you won't get to see it. It could be that they come back and say, look, we do have a few little issues here. If that's the case, then we will contact your broker or your advisor, whoever you are working with, just to say, look, these are the options to take this forward. But even then, you still won't get to see a copy of that valuation report. So that is really, really important. So if a valuation is something that's really key to you and you want to see it, then you need to be talking to your broker, your advisor, about something a bit more detailed, such as a level 2 survey. Some people call it a home buyer's report. But that will go to you. It won't go to the mortgage lender.
Thanks for tuning in to the Mortgage Heroes podcast, proudly sponsored by Hamlet Homes Warrington, your Warrington property experts. So when a surveyor is going to a house and they're reporting back to you, obviously it's not as in-depth, but is there anything specifically that they might pick up on that you go, as a lender, actually there's a few questions we've got here. So is there a few key points that a surveyor is looking for to tick off? Or?
So the vast majority of valuations come back and they're absolutely fine. So I think that's the first thing. But when they do pick up on issues, it tends to be things like bits of damp here and there, things like that. So they might come back and ask you to get a damp report for the property. Things like Japanese knotweed, these don't come up very often, but these are the type of things that they will look for. So they'll come back to your advisor and they'll give you a list of things that you would have to do to take that further. Yeah. And it's usually getting a specialist report. Yeah. And then that will go back to the valuer and we'll sort of move on from there.
And usually if that specialist report, let's take damp, for example, that's probably one of the most common that we see is damp. And it says, get a damp and timber report with a specialist and carry out any remedial work. So for those listening, that basically means once the report's done, you need to go and get the person to pay for all the work. But if the report comes back and it says, actually, nationwide, this is fine, would you usually be all right with that and then probably process to an offer?
Yeah, more than likely. So what would happen is that would come back into us and then we would forward that back onto the valuer. So it's up to the valuer just to say, yeah, he's comfortable with it. But really what a valuer is saying is, look, I'm not a specialist in this particular area, so I want you to go and get a specialist report. The specialist comes back and says, yeah, I've checked it. I can see why you may have had an initial concern, but actually everything is fine. Then more often than not, the valuer will just say, yeah, that's okay. But that would be up to the valuer to sign that off. That comes back to the lender, and then we're just comfortable with whatever the valuer tells us to do.
And we press that magic button and we get the mortgage offer through. And we all fist pump the air.
Yeah, we do.
Get the result that we want.
Sigh of relief, yeah.
Brilliant. So in terms of nationwide then, typically how long would you say from a broker making an application or somebody being in one of your branches across the UK, how long does it usually take to get an offer through?
Yeah, good question. So at the moment it's taking around about 2 weeks, something like that. So that's just on average, based on all the cases we get. So clearly there are going to be some cases where it takes that little bit longer, slightly more complex ones, but equally there'll be cases that come in where we go through it that bit quicker. So but I would say on average at the moment about 2 weeks.
About 2 weeks. Okay. And then in terms, just going back to kind of the internal process in underwriting, and we obviously have credit scores are a massive thing with mortgages and people are worried about if the score is going to be good enough. But in terms of nationwide, over the past 2 years with the pandemic, there will have been the odd late credit card payment or something like that. What's kind of nationwide's view on things like that, little hiccups?
Sure. So the way that we process mortgage applications, most major mortgage lenders, I'm sure, are the same. It's about what we call internal credit score, which is, as a broker you'll know about. Perhaps as applicants you possibly won't. There's a point system that sits behind everything that you have to pass, and nobody knows exactly how many of those points are. But the reason I'm saying this is we don't have an absolute yes, we will take this late payment or this CCJ or whatever it may be. The only way you would really know is if you sat down with your advisor and they ran what we call a decision in principle. So this decision in principle is effectively a credit check. Now with Nationwide, that's what we call a soft footprint. So it doesn't leave a marker on your credit file if that was something that you was worried about. But if you had any issues, just be completely upfront about it, and run the decision in principle and see sort of how you fare. The vast majority of cases that come through with Nationwide pass, but clearly some are declined, and adverse would be one of those reasons.
Perfect. So maybe more just, again, what you're saying earlier, sense check, looking at ways of lending, and if at the right time for somebody you can support a lending application for them. But get it across. Like you said, the best thing to do is, what we always say to customers is get a copy of your credit file, if any shadow of a doubt, and don't always necessarily focus on the score of it. It's more about the data.
Well, again, a good point. So it's great for people to look at their credit scores, but the credit scores that they see will be different than what the lenders are running. So the lenders are running credit scores with more information than what's just that you're seeing. So absolutely fantastic tool. But the important thing, if you've got any concerns, just be completely open with your advisor and run that decision in principle and see how it comes out.
Perfect. So let's assume we've done an application and a mortgage offer's come through. You're going to send a copy to the broker. The clients will get their copy, and then a solicitor gets their copy. So when you send a copy to the solicitor, and obviously they're looking to find out more about the property, what do you need to know from a solicitor to confirm about the house that someone's buying? Yeah,
sure. So the offer will go out to the solicitor, and there'll be a list of conditions in there that we ask this. So the solicitor works for the customer and the mortgage lender. So they'll go through the conditions just to check out everything is fine. So local searches, things like that. And then when they're happy with everything, they'll come back and they'll just tell us when they want to release the funds. So that will come in what we call a certificate of title. Some people call it a COT. And it's as simple as that, really, from our perspective. So when the solicitor's happy with everything, the certificate of title comes in, tells us what date they want the funds releasing, and we just release the funds and send them out to the conveyancer.
Are there any instances that you can give us whereby information reported back by the solicitor might mean that it doesn't go through?
Yeah, sure. So these things do happen. I would say it's not something to be overly worried about. Again, it's just about having that open and honest conversation all the way through and trusting your advisors. One thing that can cause problems for it, just as an example, would be sort of freehold and leasehold. So freehold properties generally completely fine. Leasehold, there's just that little bit more information needed there. So I suppose just to give an exaggerated example, if you had a leasehold property with a lease term remaining of 999 years, then on the face of it, that's absolutely fine. And that's something that perhaps a solicitor would check. But equally, if a solicitor was to pick a copy of the lease up and tell the mortgage lender that, let's say, there was only 30 years remaining on that lease, then that poses a problem. And the reason it poses a problem is what you have to remember is, whilst you're getting this absolutely fantastically cheap deal, this great rate on your mortgage to buy that house, you're offering that house up as security to get that really low interest rate. So anything that could potentially impact the value of that security is a problem to a mortgage lender, and a short lease would be a problem to a mortgage lender. So the way you have to think of it is, if we had to sell that property, the pool of people that would be interested in buying that property on such a short lease would be so severely reduced, it would clearly impact the value. And that's that's essentially what we're talking about, and one of the things that conveyancers check.
Yeah. We've had so many horror stories over the past sort of 5-6 years where it's literally been 1 year. So every lender's got a different set of criteria around like leasehold and what they will or won't accept. And criteria changes more times than I change my socks, especially the last 18 months. But we had a case once where the leasehold, let's say it was 77 years, and the lease needed to be 79 minimum, and they were just out. And in the end, the client didn't go ahead. So it's always worth, isn't it, just double checking. And the people who can give that information from the outset is usually the agent. So we can try and determine what headaches might be caused up in the future.
And again, I've said it a few times. It's all about everybody involved being completely open right from the beginning. So something like that really should be picked up on application, and it should be picked up at valuation. But if they've not been given the correct information, the last thing you want really, like you say, is for that to come up right at the very end, at completion stage, when everything's really, all the pressure is really building. Everybody,
you're ready to go.
Exactly. You want to be dealing with these issues up front, not at the end. And unfortunately, it does quite often happen the other way around. But it's just about trusting your advisors, being open and asking the right questions. So,
Awesome. So let's take a look then at different forms of income. We know there's hundreds of lenders across the UK. We've all got different sets of criteria. But how do Nationwide support self-employed? Now, we've been through the pandemic. Lots changed overnight. Businesses closed. And as a result of it, a lot of people have actually gone self-employed. We're seeing more and more people now who are taking the jump to go self-employed. So just talk us through how Nationwide can help those who are first-time buyers and maybe self-employed.
Yeah, great question, because it's very topical, like you say. So when we went into the pandemic, self-employed is one of those areas that from a lender's point of view became that little bit more. We need to ask a few more questions here just to be comfortable that we're still okay lending money. And this is where the skill of the broker comes in, because as you will know, probably better than me, is that every lender is that little bit different. And perhaps it's not the huge differences, but the little subtle differences that really catch people out. In terms of what Nationwide's doing, we've tried to keep everything quite simple and straightforward, which, maybe I'm biased, but I think what that has meant is Nationwide's position on self-employed is one of, if not the best, in the market at the moment. Very simply, you need to have been trading for 2 years. We'll ask you for your standard self-employed figures over the last 2 years, which we would have before anyway. We are doing some additional checks. We want to see bank statements, but personal bank statements, just to see how you've managed your bank account activity in the last few months. So as long as all that is okay, then all fine. We will ask you questions about any support that you've taken from the government over the pandemic period. So don't be afraid of how you answer that question. Just be completely honest. Really what we're just looking is to build up a picture of what you did, how you managed to get yourself through, and just make sure that the business is okay and ticking over nicely now. As long as all that is fine, then generally speaking, we'll be okay with the self-employed case now. You will know that's not always the case with other lenders at the moment. There's all sorts of different ways of trying to work out this way of lending to a self-employed person, but we've just tried to keep it simple and basic, and at the moment it's working really, really well.
Brilliant. And what about employed? So again, due to what's happened over the last 2 years with the pandemic, people have changed employment. So probationary periods, 3 months, 6 months in employment. What's Nationwide stance on that?
So for a long time now, one of Nationwide's biggest selling points has been what we would call day one employment. So if somebody has just started a job, even if they're in a probationary period, we're completely fine with that. It's not a problem. And we've kept that going through the pandemic, so we appreciate, like you say, that people have been put in positions where they've had to take other jobs. So we've supported that. We've stayed with that. Even if you're in probationary period, not a problem. Even if that job hasn't started yet, as long as it's no more than 3 months away, then you can provide a copy of the contract, permanent contract, signed by the employer and employee. we're completely fine with that as well. So you don't have to wait for your first pay slip or anything like that. So that's probably one of Nationwide's biggest selling points.
Which is a great point, because the uncertainty of changing jobs, or if somebody's had a job offer leading into a mortgage application, that from our perspective, that can cause a lot of panic, thinking, I don't need a job offer.
Yeah.
I'm about to apply for a mortgage.
Yeah.
It's going to kibosh the whole deal.
Yeah.
But people like Nationwide, who are here to support first-time buyers with the helping hand, with the little pieces of criteria that haven't really changed for self-employed, and looking at probationary periods or day one of employment, those sort of little things can just give a bit of certainty to people looking to buy a house, can't they?
Absolutely. And if we've been very clear on wanting to support those people, and that's how we're doing it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Darren, for giving us an insight to Nationwide. Now, listen, we could probably sit here all day and bore people to death with mortgages and all the stories in the past, but we're going to try and keep this quite short for everyone. But before we go, one thing we're asking all of our guests is, what's the one golden nugget you'd give to a first-time buyer before they make an application with Nationwide?
Yeah, great question. So absolutely, without any doubt, it's make sure you take advice. So whoever you choose to do that with, do your research, find somebody that you're really comfortable with, and just trust them completely. They're the experts. They've been through this process God knows how many times. Be completely open with them, kind of like what we was talking about earlier on. You don't want anything to come and bite you right at the very end. You want to get those questions and those obstacles dealt with right at the front. So take advice, make sure it's somebody you're comfortable with, and just enjoy the process as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, I always say that. Just keep you cool, chill out, and just enjoy the process, because it's a good ride to be on. Perfect. So you've been listening to the Mortgage Heroes podcast, proudly sponsored by Hamlet Homes Warrington, your Warrington property experts. We've been chatting with Darren from Nationwide Building Society, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.